go. How do you say start scene?
Je ne sais pas.
Bonjour!
Bonjour.
I've waited too long to say it now. Now I lost my nerve. Okay, ready? The Mand.
That's better.
I really gotta work up my courage to speak French greetings. Okay. To review what we've just talked about with verbal behavior in general, and about what each type of verbal behavior looks like. So the Mand is a type of verbal behavior that is defined by the circumstances under which it occurs and the consequence it produces. So that goes back to like we care more about like what is the purpose of the behavior in the moment rather than like what words are they saying. So for a Mand, this is special. The antecedent is a want or a need. The behavior is some form of request. I don't know if I had some sort of little pointer.
Just
Oh, you know what? You can do it. Look, watch this.
Oh, look, right here, look.
No, but look what I'm gonna do.
And then thing requested.
Laser pointer. Look.
Oh, like a laser pointer.
The want or need as shown here, right here, is the antecedent for a Mand. Here, we see that requesting for something is the actual behavior of a Mand. And here, if you'll follow the pointer, double point, the consequence is that you get the thing that you actually asked for. These are very unique to a Mand, and that's the only place you see it. That's why the Mand's a little bit kind of special. There it is.
Aww.
If you'll notice here.
Aww, Puss in Boots.
Like real life Puss in Boots.
Yeah. Haven't you seen Shrek, Cooper?
Uh-huh.
And you know how he like goes like
It
this?
looks like him.
Thank you. You got it.
It does. So understanding the
That's not
Mand. The best way, like when you go back to all this stuff,
I'm an adult.
it's like this seems a little bit complicated. Like a Mand is a verbal operant and it's defined by the consequences. Really, this you don't need to know too much more than to understand it is simply like a request. That's really all it is. Request is the reason we don't use the word request is because if you say like, give me the damn pizza, I don't know that everyone would call that a request.
Right.
Or like,
Not a polite one.
clean up right now. That's like, that wasn't a request.
That's a demand.
It was a demand. That's why we don't use request, but typically for our purposes, we do, give me all your money. That's also like, no, it's it is a Mand, but it's a demand. So Mand covers like demands, requests, whatever, but we say request because we're trying to teach our kids to politely request for things. So this is, understanding this is particularly important when you're talking to parents or other professionals because we take data on this and then we give that paper to the parents. So if you say like, you did really great on manding today, bye, they're gonna think you're like a crazy person. And or rude for using like technical language that they don't understand. So obviously after a few times the parents do, you know, get to know this terminology, but you never want to say it without saying like, do you know what, or has someone explained what that means? And then you say like, it just is another word for requesting. So a few things to point out. The reinforcer, as we saw here, right here, is always the thing that was requested. So there's a name for this. It's called specific reinforcement. And so as that kind of implies, the reinforcement for a Mand is like, it has to be what the person asked for. Like there is no good job. I mean, those, you know, those things might happen. It might be like, thanks for using your words, but the like pure in its purest form, a Mand is you get your thing. And then this is unique to the Mand. So why is manding important? Manding is super important. Number one, it's one of the first verbal behaviors that we learn, even before we can talk. Like crying in a baby is a form of a Mand. It might not start out that way. Like initially a baby probably cries for like physiological reasons. But then it turns into a way that they communicate a lot of things before they can actually speak. So manding, as you can imagine, it's basically how we meet our own needs through other people. Whatever we can't do for ourselves, if it's important, we have to ask someone else to do it. So obviously this is important for survival. Like if a baby can't cry to tell its mother that it needs food, then it's gonna die.
Unless you're attentive, period.
Or unless it has a responsible parent. But I mean,
I'm not feeding this baby until it cries.
I guess you're right. But it makes, but also independence. In some ways, it seems kind of counterintuitive that like asking people for things makes you more independent. But in a lot of ways, like imagine if you have a kid who has autism and who's nonverbal, and their parents can't ever understand any of their specific needs. They have to just like provide everything, which means they need to be on top of them all the time. They need like, here's your food, here's your always drink, and they can't allow that kid to go off and then come back and request their wants and needs when it's time. So manding does actually allow people to be more independent. Like for example, if you think about a kid who has trouble with their homework, doing independent work, and they stay after school to get help from their teacher, and if the kid is not good at asking for help or won't ask for help, their teacher has to like be on top of them and watch. If the kid is good about asking for help, the teacher can say like, okay, go do it and tell me if you need help. Same thing is like if you have a job, everybody needs help sometimes, but having like sophisticated manding skills and knowing like when to ask for help makes you more independent.
Yes.
Because people will trust you to ask for help when you need it rather than hover over you. So manding is the one verbal behavior that directly benefits the speaker as opposed to attacked, where if you say like, hey, what is this? It's a Smartie, by the way, if you can't tell. What is this? And you say Smartie, like that doesn't really benefit the person. But because of that specific reinforcement, and because of this, the want and need and the specific reinforcement, manding is the one kind of behavior that manding is the one kind of behavior that directly benefits the person who's talking. So you say like, I need the salt, you get the salt, it benefits me because I wanted salt. You say like, hey, can you scratch my back? It benefits me because I have an itch. So it's also important because, as we know, one of the big deficits with a diagnosis of autism is a language deficit. And so obviously we want to teach language, and because the mand benefits the speaker, then it's relatively easy to teach. You just have to find things that the person wants, and when you reinforce with getting that thing, that behavior increases pretty quick. Another reason that it's important is that a lot of times it's really, really, really closely related to challenging behavior. So language deficits are a lot of times what causes these challenging behaviors. Like I know we talked about last time, not last time, but in the problem behavior section, where the dad had a kid who would come over to the fridge and just like let out a high-pitched scream, and then he would come over and say, do you want milk? Do you want juice? Do you want eggs? Do you want what pie? Like whatever. And so the scream was a mand, but it was an inappropriate mand that wasn't helping anybody. So if we can teach manding, we eliminate this language deficit that leads to this challenging behavior. And a lot of the time, a replacement behavior for a lot of our kiddos is a mand. Because a lot of times if the function is tangible, then your replacement is going to be an appropriate mand. Like having an appropriate way to ask for that thing instead of a tantrum or instead of elopement or whatever. And then when you get into more advanced language, sophisticated manding allows us to accomplish more. Imagine what your life would be like if you had to you could never ask anybody for help of any kind, and you had to do everything yourself. Like, you can say like, hey, can you pick up something at the store rather than go yourself? So it's just, it only helps you function in your life, and it only makes sense. For as far as social interaction, manding doesn't just mean manding for things like, can I have the candy, can I have a haircut, can I have whatever. It can also mean manding for attention. Like typically developing kids do this where they're like, look what I can do. Like Stuart, he's manding for attention when he says, look what I can do. Stuart. So, and then this turns into like, you know, hey, how's your, oh, you have a dog? What kind of dog is it? That's a mand for information that helps you have social interaction. So mands also turn into asking questions because you want reinforcement in the form of that information. And as we grow up and mature, we have like really complex environments to navigate, and so manding allows us to do this. And then of course, this is where it gets really important. We talked about this a little bit before, how asking questions and asking for things can become a pivotal skill, meaning that it's not just that skill alone that is the benefit. That skill causes more learning, and then you see like snowball until like they're actually learning from their environment the way typically developing people do. So, and I talked about this a little bit, but asking questions is known as manding for information. So if you say like, what is this? And you don't know what it is, you want that information. If you say like, hey, how do I get to Target? The reinforcement for that is directions to Target, because ultimately you want to go to Target. And so this turns into things like, I'm going to Google how do I set up well, that's not verbal behavior, but I might ask my friend like, hey, how do I run this computer program? And then now you know. Or like, hey, can you show me how to set up this thing? And then now you know. So it really turns into lots of learning. It can also like, you know, where are my keys? Like, you know, now you can learn where your keys are, but it really turns into like, when you ask what things are, you can increase your vocabulary without being directly taught. And then this part about initiations, this is super cool new kind of research that has happened. So if you guys remember when we talked about acquisition programming and using discrete trials, the main study that was done, so for 40% of those kids, or actually for close to 50%, the outcome was not as good as we want. Like they didn't learn to talk, they didn't learn to function in a similar way as their typical peers. So they've kind of looked into this, like, hey, is there an and they keep finding this. It's like, 40% of these kids 10% don't benefit at all, and 40% don't benefit as much as we would like. Like we know this, that ABA doesn't work for everybody. So wouldn't it be nice to know, like, before kids start, like, well, what is it? Why doesn't it work? And so they did a lot of research, and then so they watched videos of the group that didn't have good outcomes and the group that had really good outcomes, and they tried to compare all these things, like, what is it? Is it their language ability before they started? Is it imitation? And they looked and looked and looked, and they couldn't find anything, because then you could say, like, hey, don't bother, like, don't waste your money, it's not going to work. Or if we know what it is, maybe we could target that. And so they looked and looked and looked, couldn't find anything, and then finally they were like, well, let's just take these two. We have video of each group, like these are individual videos of the kids, and they asked like child development professionals to rate, just like scale of 1 to 10, rate how like normal they look, and then they saw differences, and they're like, well, they're basing this on something, like maybe they can't even, like the professionals didn't say like it's this, and they looked and looked, and then they found out that it was initiations was a huge factor. So if you watch a kid, even if they have tons of challenging behavior, doesn't look like they have very many skills, but they're making initiations with their environment and other people, that's a good indicator. And then so if you see a kid who goes in a room and just kind of like engages in stereotypy, doesn't engage too much with the environment, doesn't engage with other humans, those were the kids who didn't make a lot of progress. And it makes sense when you think of here we go. Where's the learning part? Oh, that's right here. I was on it. when you think of manding as like a pivotal skill that helps you learn, manding is an initiation. It comes from, the antecedent is a want or a need. So nobody has to come up to you and say like, hey, what do you want? Sometimes we do ask people what they want. But, you can mand out of the blue. I can say like, I feel like having a cheeseburger today. And that's a mand. It's based on like my internal wants and needs. So it's like I'm initiating it. So if we can teach manding as spontaneous, that's how you kind of start to get these initiations, and then maybe we can change the likelihood that kids will benefit from our services. So that's really, really huge. Huge. And that's like a relatively new thing. Like it's always been kind of like ABA is super, super, super effective, except maybe not for 10% of people. Right. But like because it is so effective for some kids, we kind of like overlook that. But what if we could, make more progress with lots of kids? So most important, obviously, this is all important, not important if we're not going to talk about like how to actually teach it. So first step is to choose a mode of communication, and the basic three, I don't know what another one would be, are, why am I not using my pointer? Vocal speech, signs, and pictures. Each one of these, vocal speech is obviously preferred, super preferred. Vocal speech obviously is like the most functional for someone. You can go out and you can use vocal speech anywhere. Signs and picture systems both have their setbacks. Like number one, what's the obvious setback for teaching a kid signs?
It's not universal.
It's not, you can't, if that kid gets lost and wants to go ask, good luck finding someone who understands signs. Another setback for using signs is,
not all signs are universal.
not all, even if there's
Full
different.
approximation and stuff.
And a lot of our kids have a hard time learning the signs or don't have the motor skills to do them. So even if you do have a community that can understand signs, a lot of our kids have modified signs. So it's like, do you know that kid's signs? Like signs do a good job of helping a kid out with their home, in their classroom, at the center where they use signs. When it comes to like, I'm gonna go to the mall, it's not as helpful. Pictures, the big setback, what's the big setback with pictures?
Convenience. It's inconvenient.
It's inconvenient, and also it's like, if you see their communication starting to develop, how many pictures you're gonna have? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you want to communicate your wants and needs, and it's like, here's all in case I want
Here's
to with
50
lettuce.
binders of
Yeah, here's
communication.
15 binders. And by pictures, I don't just mean actual pictures. I also mean like communication devices that are picture based. And sometimes it's like you press it, and then so you're pressing cucumber because you want a cucumber. It says I want a cucumber. So here's kind of what those look like. If you haven't seen them, if you've never worked with kids with autism, or this is a picture exchange system. PEX is a picture exchange system. It's like an official one. So if you hear people say PEX, they're probably not using it correctly. It's supposed to be used just to talk about this brand name system. Really, you can use any pictures. PEX uses these board maker pictures, which is like, may or may not be a good thing. But basically the idea is the same thing. It's like I give you a picture and then you give me whatever that picture is. This is an iPad with a speech device. If you can tell, the pictures look the same as these. It's just the benefit is also it says it, so it can be maybe sometimes a little more clear. So you want to pick. So even though vocal is highly preferred, not all kids talk. So if they're not, you can't force them to talk. So if they're not making even a lot of sounds, then we're not going to wait around for it and like put their communicating their wants and needs on hold. So you kind of pick one. And then step 2 is you have to identify, because of, I'm not going to go through all the slides again because it's going to take longer and longer, but because that the antecedent for a mand is a want or a need, you can't teach a mand unless you know what that person wants or needs. So you have to identify preferred or reinforcing items, and this is both like general, because it's good to have a general list, because if it's always different, then that's going to be hard. But it is going to vary moment to moment a little bit, so you also want to know that they're preferred or reinforcing in the moment. And the more motivating, the better, because practice makes better, makes perfect. And so if somebody gets sick of bubbles after 3 times, then that was your 3 chances to practice manding with bubbles. If it's like they love tickles and they can never get sick of being tickled, then you want to use that. Next step is to identify specific responses for the mand. So a lot of our kids are not like, okay, it's going to be like, can I have a piece of candy, please? Because if they could do that, then we wouldn't be teaching this. So you want to either pick whatever signs you're going to use or pictures you're going to use, or vocal, and sometimes you might need to modify the vocal response. Like for a kid who has just barely emerging vocal, you might want to teach them to say like, if they say like, hey, but it's understandable to the main people that matter, then like, cool, we'll take it. And sometimes you want to, this is also research that I've seen where it's like, actually never mind, I have a slide about it later. I'll just save it. But you want to make sure that you don't want to pick something that is like really hard for the learner. It can be something, you can teach it initially before you get to, like sometimes you use imitation to teach signs before you teach the sign as a mand. Like if this means potty, you say, do this, and then you use prompting and prompt fading like normal, and then you say, do this, and now you have a mand that where the only way you prompt it is you just like do this. The next step is to identify an effective prompt. So this depends on what communication form you chose. If you chose vocal, then a lot of times what is helpful is to use just an echoic prompt. So if you're teaching them to say like, candy is the request. So this is a kid who emits very limited words. You're using 1-word mands and you want them to say candy. And they can say it, it's clear they can say it, they don't use it, but they can. Like just a simple, echoic meaning vocal imitation. So it's like, yummy. And then you say candy, and then you say candy, and then you give it. So we're kind of like transferring what that operant is. It starts out as an echoic. They're not saying candy because they know it'll get them candy. They're saying it because they just do that. They repeat what you say. But you do that enough times, and like now it's a mand, and now they can use it as both.
Candy.
So, or obviously, if you're using pictures and signs, your prompts are probably going to be physical or gestural, like pick up the thing. So you might have to just to get the form off the ground, you might have to prompt it initially. And then once you've identified all these things, you teach, and we're going to go through this, and then we'll demonstrate it in a little bit. So these are the steps for just like a common procedure for teaching mands. Really, like anything else in ABA, there are like a million different ways, and it's individualized to the learner. But this is like a basic, pretty effective way. So you have to either contrive or capitalize on motivation, which means that since we know that if there's no motivation, then it's not a mand. You need to either make them want something. Like if I go like, oh, this Smartie is so delicious. That's like I'm encouraging. They're gonna be like, ooh, I want one. Or sometimes the motivation's there. You just have to capitalize on it. So like if you see them reaching for the Smarties, that you're like, oh, they're motivated. I'm gonna use that. Use a time delay, which we're gonna talk about all these more. And then you prompt, and then you reinforce. So motivation, as you remember, the antecedent for a mand is a want or a need. In other words, motivation for something. No motivation, no mand. If you're trying to teach and you're missing that piece of it, you're going to teach like really strange behavior. What you're teaching is probably attacked because they don't want it. You give it to them. They don't care. They're just doing it to like get you away from them. Yeah, to please you, which like that's attacked. That's like that baby saying like doggy. So you don't want them doing it to make you happy. You want them doing it because they want it. And we see this with some kids where it's like they'll only mand in like manding sessions, and then they'll do it. But then when they really want and need things in real life, they don't do it. So you're gonna wait for either evidence of motivation, which like the obvious way that you see that is if you see access behaviors like reaching, looking, climbing the bookshelf to get the toy that's in a box up there. If you see them trying to access the behavior, obviously they access the thing, obviously they want it. And then this, sometimes if you're not doing this, so this is like an old study, or this was a study, and they wanted to teach kids to ask. We talked about how, I'm right here. Question asking is kind of a pivotal behavior, and it's huge. So question, you want kids to ask questions, so they would do this. And they would say, okay, so Cooper was over there. Okay, ready? So they would use prompting and prompt fading. And remember, you can man for information. So they wanted to teach kids to say, like, what is that? So that they can, like, what is it called? Recruit their own tasks. And so they can, like, increase their own vocabulary rather than us just, like, teaching it to them. So they would be like, say, what is it?
What is it?
It's a cue, good job! Give them candy.
Good job.
Oh no, what letter is what I'm supposed to be saying? Say, what letter is it?
What letter is it?
It's a B! Oh, excellent!
What letter is it?
It's an R! Oh, there it is! Candy!
What letter is it?
It's an M! Here!
You're so reinforced that. What letter is it?
It's an F! Candy! But like,
Oh.
he doesn't care about what letter it is. That's not a Mand. So it's like, he was doing it for the candy, which is not specific reinforcement. The specific reinforcement should be the information. So if he was trying to write something, and he said like, how do you spell whatever, because that's part of a bigger task that he's doing, that would be a Mand. Or like if he's trying to do a task. Yes, it's faulty stimulus control. What's controlling it is this. He sees me go like this, and he says, what letter is it? It's like a strange tact. He's not saying napkin or paper, but he's saying what he learned to say. If I say what letter is it, I'll just get like, be happy. So this was a study they did, and then later they looked back and said like, oh, we screwed it up. And then they didn't do the reinforcement. You should be able to teach a Mand without any other source of reinforcement. Like, no good job, you shouldn't need any of that if it's really a Mand, because that reinforces a reinforcer. So they did it again without the candy, and the responding stopped, which means it was not a Mand. So contriving, like I said, you can show the object, you can interact with it, you can put it, if you know it's a preferred object, you can put it in a container that they cannot open so that they can see it, but they can't get it. You can put things up high, you can stop what they're doing. Like if they're spinning in a chair, you can hold the chair and like, now you know they want to spin because you saw them spinning, so you can like, then you can have them man for it. Or you can, so time delay, normally, the kind of prompting we've done a lot of work with up until now is like prompting and prompt fading. So this is a totally different procedure. So you're at the point where you see motivation, like you have the candy in your hand and you're holding it and they're like, and you know you need to teach a Mand because even though they can say the word candy, they're not asking you, they're trying to pry your hand open, which is like, obviously I need to teach you this because who does that? Or any other kid would be saying like, can I have that please? So you're there, you have the motivation, what are you going to do? What's your prompting system? So you're going to use this called time delay, and what you do is you start out prompting and you're going to gradually increase your delay before you prompt. And the reasoning is, so say you start out with like a 0-second delay. You see the motivation. Do I have more of this? Yeah. You see the motivation, you say candy, they say candy, and you give. See the motivation, candy, candy, give. And that's successful like 3 times. So now you're going to increase it hopefully they're getting the idea of what they're supposed to do. So then you see the motivation and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They haven't done it, so you go candy and they say candy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They don't do it, candy, candy. So you know that they're doing the response, but they're not beating you to it. So we're gonna increase again. You see the motivation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, candy, and they do it and you give it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then they say candy, and then you give it. And now they did it independently. So the idea behind a delay, and you want to keep it short in the beginning because you might have to actually just teach the response. But eventually, the purpose of the delay is the longer the delay, the more it benefits the learner to respond independently. Because what if you increase it up to a minute? Like, are they going to sit around waiting for a minute trying to access, or like all they have to say is candy and then they get it right away? So hopefully you reach this magical point where it's like, okay, they're not going to wait and they start responding independently. At that point, their delay to the response should decrease because the reinforcement is better when they behave more quickly. And usually you increase the delay until the learner beats you to the prompt. What I said, I described like a steady increase. Sometimes it's like you just start out with, if you have a kid who has manded and who can mand but doesn't do it consistently, then you might want to say like, I'm going to do a 30-second delay. And I'm going to contrive the motivation, and I'm just going to wait for 30 seconds because I know they have done it before. And at that point, I don't want to just sit there doing nothing because they have to do the behavior in order to get the reinforcement. And then you keep it steady. So it's kind of, if you're working on a very, very, very beginning mander, you might want to start with 0 and then increase. If you're working with a kid who does mand, you might just pick one. You might pick 2 minutes because you know that you want to pick it to the point, you want to increase it to the point where they just do it independently. And then it's called focused attending, or like an expectant look. So you have your good big prompt that will just like make them do it. It's called a controlling prompt. But while you're holding it, you kind of like a face like, what do you want? Like, you don't have to say what do you want, but it's like, and it's like a gesture. It's like a very, very mild prompt that you can fade easily, and hopefully it occasions that independent response from them, so they can do it. And then your actual prompt. So now you're at the point, like, you waited. Well, that was the delay. Learner didn't mand independently. The delay and the prompt kind of come together. So you waited, your learner didn't mand, and it's time to prompt. You're gonna, like what we said about the candy, so we must have predetermined that the mand we want this kid to use for candy is candy, like just the one word prompt. So you're gonna have to predetermine this before you start training. You might realize that it's not effective while you're doing it. So like maybe you decided, usually you can get this kid to say candy by saying cat, like just a partial verbal prompt, but it's not working. Maybe they're saying cat. So at that point you would change your prompt. So you just, ABA procedures are never perfect when you start. Like you run in things and then you respond to your data and effectiveness. So you kind of do that. Ideally you want it to be a controlling prompt, something that will just make them do it. Like, so for one kid we're teaching her like to point for preferred items because she's just like a very basic learner and we haven't decided which to use, pictures or signs. And so it's becoming a controlling prompt where it's just a partial physical and we do her finger and then she points. It didn't start that way. It started, we had to like fully physical her. So who knows what you might use. This is not something that you're gonna have to like come up with, but this is just so you understand the process and where it's coming from when you see this type of programming with your kid. This is what it is. And you can also have input into this decision and say like, hey, I'm doing this procedure, but my prompt is not like working. You know what I mean? You can kind of identify and troubleshoot and be part of that team when it comes to adjusting programming. And then, like I said, you might have to combine that time delay thing with the typical prompting that we always use to get the response to happen. And then this part's pretty easy. You use the specific reinforcement. You want to do it like so fast. Just like we already talked about immediacy of reinforcement, in general, like the sooner it is, the better, because if you wait, then who knows what you're reinforcing, yeah. Because this might happen, like, oh, you asked me for candy, and a lot of kids have this like intense access behavior. Here you go, and then like, yeah, grab, scream, like, ah, and then you give it, and now you reinforce that. So verbal praise, oh, we sad face, because for any other time you always want to use verbal praise. Like, this is true, but I'm number one guilty of this. Like, I still say like good asking.
Yeah.
I just do.
I
and like
good everything.
Right.
Good
like I
walking,
can't
good
help
acting,
it.
Good looking. Good, you know.
Yeah.
Good smiling.
Technically, if you have a kid where if you're not 100% positive that this reinforcer that you're working with is what they actually want, you want to avoid the verbal praise. If people don't do this, it's like whatever. I'd rather have staff that are like so in the habit of being reinforcing that they can't help it. But technically what this might confuse is now you're in that situation with the what letter is it, where it's like they're doing it to make you happy. So a lot of kids don't care about verbal praise, so like whatever. You want to pair the verbal praise with the food because then you make it more likely for them to care about it. And so this, I know we talked about like differential reinforcement before, how where if a response is prompted and they did it right, like that's cool, that's good, they're on the right track, but what we're really going for is unprompted independent responding, and so that's when you want to be like, yes! So it might be tempting to say like, they say candy, and if it's prompted, you give them 1, and if it's unprompted, you give them 3, but really like that differential comes with the delay. Because if they wait for the prompt, they're having to wait for the candy, and if they do it independently, they get it fast. So initially, don't worry too much about like, oh, but that took them 30 seconds. Like, well, that's the cost of it. So just give it to them, because we want the behavior to be reinforcing when they eventually do it. So yeah. And then we're gonna demonstrate, and I was gonna do it with Cooper, but it really doesn't matter. Okay.
I know, I'm just been homework.
I know, I was like, it shouldn't. Like checking out my own hair and then like
Oh, sorry guys.
Yeah.
That's how I am in the DSP videos.
I know, I was just like, oh, that's what I look like today.
Can we
Great.
see? Oh, there's like this big glare, but you can see it against the table.
Yeah, it's just the clears for us. That's gonna be fun. So.
Okay. Is that how it's looked in the videos? It's fine.
Yeah.
Because we did some screen earlier. Okay, so
Oh, wait a minute. Your Lauren's gonna escape for a second.
she's running.
Ah!
Okay, so we're gonna just go. Oh, you guys can't see them, but I'll say the steps. So first thing is I'm going to look for and try to get some motivation. So maybe I don't have candy. Obviously, I want to make sure she can see it. Pretend we already know that like Amanda loves Smarties more than anything. I'm like, oh, she's reaching for it. I have my motivation. So now I'm gonna wait. We'll pretend we're starting at, and we decided that the prompt we're gonna use is echoic, so I'm just going to say candy, and then she says candy. So I saw her reaching, and now I'm going to wait my delay, and right now my delay is 0 seconds, because I want to make sure. So I saw her reach, candy.
Candy.
Whoop whoop. There you go, you get it. And here's another thing we talked about this already. How much candy should I give her? If she says candy and I give her the whole thing, like, well, there was my session. Hope she enjoyed it. And she might not want very much more. Like, even candy that kids love, they get satiated on it. So, like, I don't know, we have a kid where it's like, you want it to be as small as possible where they still want it. But, because then you avoid satiation and you get more trials. Yeah, and you're also not just like sugaring them up. Okay, well I can't do that, but pretend they're very small. This is a Smartie. Like I think you can break a Smartie into like 4, 5, 6 pieces. So we're gonna do again. So say our criteria is if she gets it, if she responds to the prompt 3 times in a row, we'll move up. And these are things that you'll see in your programming if you come across this kind of programming. So I'm still at 0. I'm gonna wait till I see her like, mom. Oh, she's looking, she's smiling, she's reaching candy.
Candy.
Whoop whoop. Oh, see, I'm not supposed to do that, but
I'm not supposed to wait. Do you want me to wait?
no,
Okay.
do it. So that was 2 times. She responded to 0. Candy.
Candy.
And see how she's getting faster? Like that's a good sign. So now I'm gonna increase it to 5 seconds because she's responding to my prompts, and now I want to give her an incentive to respond faster. Oh, so I saw motivation. She's like hardcore. She's creeping on my candy. Candy.
Candy.
She didn't say it, so I prompted her. Ooh, she's eyeballing it. Oh my god. 4, 5, candy.
Candy.
There you go. And that was 2 times, but we'll pretend it was 3 so that we could do this. And then now I'm gonna move to 10, hoping that she's still motivated to get it, and maybe she'll prompt now. I mean, maybe she'll do it by herself now. Ooh, she looked at it. She looks motivated. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Ooh, she's like reaching for it. 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I'm gonna use my focused attending because now the delay is getting longer. But it didn't work.
Candy.
Ah, it worked! Woo-hoo! So she did it independently. And at that point, now you know you have a good delay. So you don't want to move back because then it's like you're not giving her any incentive to actually use her request. So that was at 10 seconds and she beat me, so I'm going to keep it at 10. And I might even increase it to 15 because I know she can do it. So now I'm going to say like it's a 15-second delay period, and then hopefully she gets faster and faster and faster. And what you want to see is like a shorter latency, like she's getting it now and she's like candy, 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 candy. So that's that procedure. Off. Oops.
I don't think I've had any Smarties in like years.
I know, I was like, you don't have to eat them all. So here's where you get a little bit, a lot of times, we work with kids who can man, but we're trying to practice with them all the time. And so this gets tricky for a lot of people because a lot of our kids say like candy, or it's like nah, and like just being a grown, mature, responsible, polite adult, like we don't like it because it's like, don't you want to say candy please, or like something a little more appropriate. And the reasoning behind that is good. It comes from a good place because we do want to teach. If we told our kid to say candy and then send them out into the world, we didn't do them justice because we taught them to be rude. But a lot of people want to jump to this like social appropriateness level, and really the priorities are, we start with fluency. Fluency is that like fast responding, and variety. Like we want them to have maybe like 5 to 10 mans that they can say before we go to the next thing is carrier phrases. Carrier phrases are things like I want or can I have. This is important because it makes it clear that it's a request. And then social appropriateness, like can I have candy please. So that's like our bigger goal. And then the ultimate goal is to give them something like a generalizable, durable, effective skill that they can use anywhere. So we want them to be able to say like, ask multiple different ways. We want them to be able to ask multiple different people. We want them to be able to get the person's attention before they ask, things like that. So, like I said, with the social appropriateness, like basically adding please to it or saying can I instead of give me, there's an urge to push this too soon. But the rationale is, so say you have a kid who manning is not their go-to. Like they're that kid, I'm holding the candy and they're trying to pry my fingers off. So obviously they're not fluently manding. And then I prompt them, or like finally they're doing it and then they finally say candy. but it wasn't fluent, and then that's like doing it independently and waiting is like a big deal. You want to reinforce it. When you say like, use a full sentence, say it nicely, say candy please, you're adding that delay, and so it's like you're extinguishing it or punishing it when it's not fully developed yet. So you want to wait until the response is fully developed and fast before you add things like please. You also want to look for, these are some things that sometimes get forgotten. It's like we sit and do a manding session where it's like I have the candy, do it, and then you give it. But you also want to teach our kids to go like tap someone on the shoulder if they're not facing them, or like even travel to go get them. Like a lot of times we're working one-on-one with our kids, and that's kind of unnatural. Like kids don't always have someone around to like just be ready for mands. So you want to teach things like getting attention, coming to get you to do it. And this can be a funny thing that happens too. Sometimes kids, because of like teaching in manding sessions, they don't request things when they're out of sight. So there are ways to work on that. You basically just slowly move the item out of sight. So typically developing children mand hundreds of times a day. So you can help your learner be more verbal and social by giving them a chance to do this too. So this is we have a lot of kids like this where they have a lot of words, they can say them, they can mand, it's just not fluent and it's not their go-to. Like their go-to, like you if you have something they want, they like and it's like prompt dependent for them to ask. So it's called mand immersion, where you want to mimic this hundreds of opportunities. And so you do all kinds of crazy weird things to them. So basically your job is to interrupt their life. Like if they're spinning in a chair having fun, you stop it so that they have to say spin. If they're swinging on the swing and they love it, you grab the swing and they have to say swing, or they have to say let go. If they're spinning on the merry-go-round, you stop it and they have to say push me, or you just let it go. Like a lot of times it's like I'm engaged with my kid, I'm spinning them on the merry-go-round, but really what you're missing is like all these opportunities to get mands, like spin it once, let it die, push me please, spin it once, let it die. So anything you can kind of have control of and stop, you can get a mand from it. Chain interruption, a lot of times if you ask, or if a kid knows how to do a chain of behavior, like washing their hands, you hide the soap. And then now they know they need the soap, but some kids, if you do that, you have it in your hand. All they have to do is ask. They'll look at you, they'll do it, and they'll leave. Like they won't do that, what seems like a natural behavior, and then you can prompt through that if you need to. Interrupting anything they do, you can stand in their way, so they have to say move. You can give instructions for them to do something where you have the object. So if you contrive like a cooking task where it's like we're gonna make Play-Doh and like you hid the eggs and all the stuff and they have to ask for them, or if you have the markers, like you stole one and you say like, ooh, can you make me like a really green juicy apple, but you have the only green, so they have to ask you. Or if it's like, clean up and you have the container, things like that. Theft. This is kind of related to the other ones where it's like you steal missing items, basically is what it is. Like you have them do a task, draw a picture, do a craft, and like the glue is hidden, the whatever is hidden. Something like, there's this game where it's like, what's it like? Kadu or something like that, but it's like an awesome game for kids because it's like you put all these maps on the floor and they're like shapes, instruments, whatever, and then this little voice says like, find a red shape. Go to the
Some of those crayon
music.
games,
Yeah. It's awesome. So if you did that, like you can take away the blue mat, and then they have to ask for it. So kind of like opening your eyes to these opportunities will help you get a lot of responding out of your learner. And then this is something you don't even need a program for this. This is like something you can do and should be doing during outings, during breaks, during all the time. Obviously, if your learner can mand and does mand appropriately, then like don't make all these false, don't make it weird. But if you have a kid like CC,
CCDK.
then like you want to do this because these are these kids who are like, they have all these skills, but they look like a bump on the log when they're just in there. Like they don't make these initiations. So you want to give them that chance. And that's it for my ending.